Hi, welcome back. In this lesson, we'll look at authentication versus authorization. So if you look at this picture on the left-hand side, that's the authentication, and on the right-hand side, you have the authorization. This picture tells you the whole story, but just to summarize, authentication is a process of determining that somebody really is who he claims to be. And authorization refers to the rules in terms of what are they allowed to see. To keep it simple, imagine, let's say you go into a building, your office building, and then you need to have your access card, right? So that is your authentication. So when you touch the access card and the gates would open. So when you touch the card, the gates get opened. That is the authentication process. So the card is proving you are the person who you claim to be. So the card has some unique reference ID number, and then you touch it, and then the gate in turn is coded in such a way that it recognizes you are an active employee, and then it would open the gates for you. So that's you're entering the building. But just because you can enter the building doesn't mean you can go on to every floor, right? There might be some restricted areas where you can't have access, or you will not have access. So you will have access to the building, but may not necessarily have access to all the floors. So that's the authorization bit. The two concepts are completely different and they are independent. You need to understand the difference. And I've seen this a lot of times developers use these terms interchangeably. So make sure from next time you differentiate what is authentication and then also what is authorization. And to keep it simple and in different terms, you can think authentication is a process where you have some kind of user ID and then password. So you would have, let's say that you go into the office building and then you need to log in. You need to authenticate for the first time. You're running on Windows operating system, so you would log on to your Windows and you go into you connect your Office network. So you're authenticating inside your Office network. But whereas you may not have access to all the systems and all the databases, that is where authorization kicks in. If you see here, some of the items are crossed and some of the items have tick boxes, right? So that talks about what you have access to, what you don't have access to. And some of the other differences between authentication and authorizations is authentication is a verification process. It is validating and verifying the person you claim to be. And whereas authorization is all about permissions. So you have access to the network and then you need to have permission to view certain databases or certain tables in database. And if you think about authentication, think about who rather than what, where authorization is all about what. So authentication is about proving that you are the person who you claim to be. Okay, now that you prove the person you claim to be, but what access do you have? That's all about authorization. And primarily authentication deals with your Active Directory and LDAP. Although they are completely different, Active Directory is a directory service made by Microsoft, and it provides all sorts of functionalities like authentication, groups, and user management, policy administration, and more. And LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, is a means for querying items in any directory. Basically, AD uses a flavor of LDAP. And I'll give you a simple analogy. If you really think about IIS and HTTP. So basically, HTTP is a web protocol, and then IIS is a web server which implements HTTP protocol. Same way, Active Directory is the directory service which uses LDAP framework. So Active Directory is not LDAP, but it is one of the example of LDAPs. Primarily Windows users run on Active Directory, and remember that LDAP is not a product. An authorization from Qlik security implementation perspective is primarily section access and then loop and reduce. So section access is more dynamic data reduction, and loop and reduce is considered more like a static data reduction. So in section access, you implement, for example, you might have NT names or user IDs. You will have data reduction on multiple fields or single field. Whereas with loop and reduce, you would loop through an application and reduce the data and create multiple copies of the application. Loop and reduce is, you can only implement loop and reduce when you have QlikView publisher license available. So for example, let's say that you have 3 departments, Department A, Department B, and Department C, and you can have one source document, and then you can have 3 user documents. So each of the user documents will only contain subset of data. So Department A, Department B, and Department C. So these 3 are completely separate user documents, but they are created by using one source document. So that is like at a high level loop and reduce. We will cover loop and reduce in later chapters, but for a high level overview, loop and reduced can be part of authorization along with section access. So you can also implement loop and reduce along with section access. These are not mutually exclusive, so you can implement them together. So I hope this makes sense and then gave you some idea about authentication and authorization. So the main takeaway is authentication is all about verification, and authorization is all about permissions. So next time when someone talks about authentication, more likely they might be talking about Active Directory or custom LDAP. On QlikView server, you can also implement custom LDAP. Thank you for watching.